Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be with you tonight. In our Bibles, we're going to be in Jeremiah 29, and I invite you to get your text and open your Bibles to that chapter. We'll be there in just a moment. Jeremiah chapter 29. Truly is a blessing to be with you if you're visiting this good church tonight, as I am this week. Thank you so very much for being here. This church means a lot to so many, and it has been a tremendous blessing to spend this Lord's Day together with you in worship, in prayer, in time together with God's people. To your good shepherds, I love you for many reasons. I love you for who you are and for what you stand for, but what took place at 4 o'clock is but another reason. The deep prayers you brought this good people before the throne of God, and the way that you helped to bring comfort and peace and faith and assurance. Thank you, good shepherds. What wonderful hearts you have, and what a difference you made. It's been so good to be with you today. I said this morning, there's so much to be said, and to boil it down, I just am thankful for you, and so thankful for every opportunity we get to be together. It's been special to be with Brother Don. He was with us in the spring and held a meeting for us in April, and we enjoyed our week with him. It kind of clicked as I was sitting and going over things today that being with you this year kind of echoed what took place 3 years ago. Don was with us in the spring 3 years ago, and he showered love on my family, particularly my daughter Emma, and then I came and was with you in the fall. After I left from you all 3 years ago, I met up with my family. They flew down, and we were doing some stuff with Disney, and there was one day we sat down to eat, and unprompted, my boy said, "Appa, you are our favorite preacher." And I said, "Oh, that means so much. Thank you." And so I looked over at my daughter, Emma, and I said, "Emma, am I your favorite preacher?" She goes, "No, you're number 8. I said, 8? First of all, what 8 preachers do you know? And then secondly, who's number 1? And she said, Mr. Don. That has not changed in 3 years, despite all the ways I have tried to instill in her bad company corrupts good morals. She's just not listening quite now. No. We love Mr. Don, as I know you'd love Don and Vicky. And being here with them this week just means the world. And so thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you and to be with those who mean the most to me. We're looking at a letter tonight for our brief time together in the Word of God. God is sending a letter to His people through His prophet Jeremiah. The people were far from home. They were taken as captives by the Babylonians. Jeremiah 29 and verse 1 says, "These are the words of the letter which Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem to the rest of the elders of the exile, the priests and the prophets and all of the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." Dark times and difficult days are the context of our chapter here. In fact, if you'll keep your marker here in Jeremiah 29 and just go back to Psalm 137, we get a picture of what was on the heart of these people, the recipients of the letter from God. Psalm 137, just a few verses to put our finger on the pulse of the people at this time. Psalm 137 and verse 1 says, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept. We remembered Zion. When upon the willows in the midst of it we hung our harps, for there our captors demanded of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, 'Sing us one of the songs of Zion.' How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget her skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy." A homesick people in a faraway land. They were surrounded by people who not only did not believe in God, the way they lived was a complete contradiction to the morals and righteous upstandard of God and His law. The letter God gives expresses His expectation for His people while they were in that land. I don't know if you ever thought about that. Once they arrived in Babylon, as God said they would through the prophets long ago, and they finally are taken as captives, what were they to do? What was life to look like as captives in this foreign land? Were they to try and escape? Kind of like the Great Escape, wait for some gaps in the walls and then try and make their way back home? Were they to rally together and to try and defeat the Babylonians? What did God want from them when they were far from home? And that's where our letter takes place. Jeremiah 29 and in verse 4, it says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon, build houses and live in them, and plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and become the fathers of sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters and multiply there and do not decrease. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will have welfare. For thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, do not let your prophets who are in your midst and your diviners deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams which they dream, for they prophesy falsely to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. For thus says the Lord, when 70 years have been completed for Babylon, I will visit you and fulfill my good word to you and bring you back to this place. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. And you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will restore your fortunes and will gather you from all the nations, from all the places where I have driven you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from where I sent you into exile." Seems strange, doesn't it? It's not what you would expect. The message of God to His people while living in an enemy land is, I want you to be a blessing. I want you to bless the people where you are, the land in which you are in. He gives them some specific outlines here. He says, I want you in verse 5 to make improvements. That if you find land that hasn't been tilled, I want you to till it, and to plant gardens. I want you to make improvements upon the place in which you are in. And then he tells them in verse 7 to make good impressions. That they are to bless the people, to seek their welfare in verse 7. And he says, I want you to pray for them. And it's not praying those imprecatory psalms, judge these people and destroy them. I want you to pray God's blessing on the people, on the leaders of the land you're in. And he says in verse 6, I want you to make a future. I don't want you to stop living. I don't want you to give up on life. I want you to marry and to have children. And I want your children to marry and have children. I want you to go on with life and to build good, God-fearing homes that will continue to honor me and bless wherever it is that they are. I want you to bless the land you're in. Verse 7, 3 times the word shalom is used. Our English word is the word welfare. I want you to seek the peace of the land in which you're in. There's a balance that's struck in this section here. In one language, in verse 7, he's calling for them to love and bless and care for this foreign enemy land in which God has placed them. But in verse 10, he says, I don't want you to forget this isn't your home. This isn't where you're going to be forever. There's going to come a day, and I'm going to remember my promise, and I'm going to bring you from here back to your home. They weren't to try and escape. They weren't to try and fight this as much as they didn't like where they were, because in verse 4 of the context, God sent them there. This was God's plan. But the balance exists. I want you, while you're here, to love the city and to love the people you were with, but I also want you to not lose your longing for home. Love the city and long for home. Do you see the application already? Has the sermon preached itself in your minds? There's a timeless message God is sending to exiles then, today, for every generation, about what it means to live in a foreign land, realizing what is yet to come, promised by God. Let's just walk for a moment together. There is a call for us to love the city in which we're in. We know from the mountain message that we are to not make this everything, to set up deep roots here on the earth. We're not to lay up for ourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but to lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. You could sing the song with me. This world is not my home. I'm just passing through. We've got that. This isn't the end. This isn't what God has designed for His people to be our final destination. And in many ways, we are called exactly what these people were called. Peter opens his letter by calling us exiles. Some would say strangers or aliens living in a foreign land. If you thought that then, what would it mean if we were to take the principle God is laying out of His expectation for His people in Jeremiah 29 and to bring that here to 2024? What would that mean for us to seek the welfare of our city? We're people who love our country. We're blessed. We're blessed in the United States of America. There are times this country frustrates us, and that will only continue throughout the rest of this year. But by and large, this is a good land that God has richly blessed through its history. What would it look like for we, the people of God, not just to bless America and this country and this time in which we're in, but specific to you, and I'm going to walk it off the page and take it back to Dallas with me. What would it mean to bless the city of Tampa? You as the people of God seeking its welfare. Well, we might start here. That it means living as obedient citizens. That, as Paul would lay out in Romans 13, beginning in verse 1, he says, "Let every person be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, he who resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves." That is, we obey the laws of the land. So long as those laws are aligned with the will and the purpose of God, we find ourselves obeying and submitting to these laws. Which means if the government decides to lay more taxes upon us, we don't have to like it, we don't have to agree with it, but if it's in line with God's will, I'm going to submit and obey. The HOA has certain rules about what it is I can have outside or on my house or around my house. I don't have to like it. I can get on the page and express my disagreement, but at the end of the day, I'm going to comply and follow suit. I think that wrestles with some of us. With some of us, we just kind of feel like you can't tell me what to do. Our natural inclination is no one can tell me what to do. We can be in a Target parking lot and the arrow is pointing the opposite way, and we say, I can drive wherever it is I want to drive. Our submission to those who are in laws or positions of leadership shows the world our willingness to seek peace. It shows the world that we understand the true source of authority and where it comes from. It shows the world our ability to comply, to submit, to put others before ourselves. One of the ways we can seek the welfare of this nation is by living as obedient citizens. One of the ways we can seek the welfare of our nation and of our city is by praying for our leaders. As Paul would say in 1 Timothy 2 and verse 1, "First of all then, I urge that all entreaties and prayers and petitions and thanksgiving be made on behalf of all men, for kings and for all who are in authority, in order that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity." Pray for your leaders. Which leaders? All of them, all of them, all of them. The principal, your governor, your senator, the president, every single person who will occupy a seat of leadership, we're praying for them. And it's not praying judgment. It's not praying that the Lord will give them 4 flat tires on your major highway here tomorrow morning. I'm praying their salvation. I'm praying that the Lord will soften their heart and that they will hear the gospel and that they too will bend their knee in submission to King Jesus. They would never do that. There's no one in Washington who would do that. Careful, brethren, because there's a king in Babylon who bent his knee to Jehovah God. Even Nebuchadnezzar's can change. How can we bless this land? I'm not going to post about leaders, which will do nothing but frustrate those who rate everything that I post. I'm not going to complain about leaders to all those who are around me, because that will do nothing but annoy those who listen to me in conversations. But I will bend to the one person who can always make a difference in this life. I will take the hearts and the minds of those who will lead this land to the throne of God, and my prayer will be soften their heart to hear the truth, that we as God's people, as long as we are in this land, can lead the lives He's called us to live. A quiet life, a good life, a righteous life that pursues godliness and dignity. We will bless this land when we work hard. when we are those who work hard. As Paul would say in Colossians 3, beginning verse 23, whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. Employers ought to be so thankful when they have Christians as their employees, because as God's people, we show up and we show up on time. As God's people, we do our work and we put in a good, honest day's work. As God's people, we don't complain, we don't gripe, we don't slander, and we don't gossip. As God's people, we're not hard to work for, and we're certainly not hard to work with. We're humble and kind and gentle. We are, as our brother Don pointed us today, because of Jesus, the very example of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. We are people who bring peace. Even at home, I'm not those who log on and then I go shopping on Amazon or go skipping around out in the yard. People can count on me. I'm dependable, I'm faithful, I'm hardworking. One of the ways we'll bless this land is by showing people I'm not just working for a paycheck. I'm not just working to pay the mortgage. I'm following the example of my God who has worked. I want to please Him and honor the Master. We will bless this land when we are peaceful and gentle to all. As Paul would say to Titus in Titus 3 and verse 2, to speak evil of no one, to avoid quarreling, to be gentle, and to show perfect courtesy to all people. Look how that began. Speak evil of. Who does no one include? Everyone. Everyone. Every elected official, they're no one. And everyone. Every knowing neighbor. Every King Saul in my life. Every person on Facebook with all caps that seems to get under my skin. Speak evil of no one. We're not a people known as those who like to fight and contend. We're not the aggressive Babylonians who want to conquer the world with our might and our intellect. That doesn't mean that we simply allow truth to go ignored or abused. We speak the truth, but we speak it in love and in kindness. We are people who are known by our kind, gentle courtesy. A couple years ago, my folks bought some DVDs for our kids, and as soon as they arrived in the mail and I opened up and saw what it was, I thought, they are never going to watch this. The shows they watch are loud and flashy, and the show that they sent me, it didn't have Pokemon being caught or Avengers going to battle. It didn't have any princesses going off on their boats and singing their songs. It simply was of an older man with his puppets. And when I put on Mr. Rogers for my 3 kids, they were glued. It's not that he skirted around hard things when he came on the air, if you remember his show. He addressed the difficult things. He talked about racial tension and divorce and anger and abuse. But the thing that endeared Mr. Rogers to the world was that his kindness and his compassion spoke to every person who would listen. This is someone who genuinely cares for me. How will we be known, good brethren? That we stood for the truth and we crammed it down the throats of those in our neighborhoods, or that we simply were a people, yes, who spoke the truth. I just want to be known as one who is kind and compassionate, who genuinely cared for those in my life around me. We'll bless the world if we do so. Perfect courtesy towards all. We'll bless this world, good brethren, if we're good stewards. There's a passage that was written long before the event of 2024. You may be looking at something very specific when you see the verse of Proverbs 12 and verse 10 when it says, a righteous man has regard for the life of his beast, but the compassion of the wicked is cruel. This takes on a whole different meaning today when you think about dogs who have sweaters, about cats who are groomed and bathed, although they do it themselves, about pet beds and nice bowls. We were in Korea when we were adopting one of our children, and we were going on this walking path every day, and there was one day when we were on the walking path that we saw these 2 older ladies who were pushing puppies in strollers. And my wife looked at me and said, don't. What's it say when we care for our animals? I mean, it may say a lot of things. I won't dig too deep into all the psychology of that, but have you ever thought about that? Can you finish the phrase with me that Jesus says? He who is faithful in little you show me a person who cares for the small details of life. You show me a person who is compassionate even to the most innocent creatures God has put on this planet. And you will show me someone who can be trusted with great things. Good steward says, all that I have has been given to me from God. Every single thing. I'm not going to be arrogant about it. I'm not going to be careless with it. But if God has given me what it is that I have, I'm going to bless it and care for it and protect it and use it for good. We show the world we are simply recipients of an amazing, benevolent God. And we want to honor Him with the great blessings and gifts He has given to us. We will bless this city when we are servants of those in need. Your shepherds prayed that so well. It takes us right to Galatians 6, verse 10, that while we have the opportunity, while the door is open, that we are to do good to all men, especially to those who are of the household of faith. It's not for recognition and it's not for praise. The silent, simple ways that we can bless and care for another. One of the things that was echoed in all of your shepherds' prayers, though not maybe said the same way, the sentiment was expressed, bear the burdens of those who are so heavily grieving today. Maybe I can't take your pain. And there are times every parent has lived this. Every good brother or sister, you've expressed this. If I could take that pain from you and bear it myself, I would. I wish so much that I could take that from you and I would bear that for you and I would bear that pain. But I can't do that. I can't. But since I can't take your pain and I can't get you out of this valley, at least I'll walk side by side with you then. I'll walk the valley with you. I'll help you carry that load. I'll try and make things lighter and better and easier. We are a people who look to do good with the good things that God has given to us. We are a people who raise godly families. Ephesians 6 and verse 4, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. One of my favorite quotes read years ago said that perhaps our greatest contribution in the kingdom of God is not something we do, but someone we raise. And all the difference you are making, good parents. Some of you brought your children early this morning. You brought them here at 4 o'clock, and here they are again. You are making a difference in the world. The difference maker is not the White House, it's our house. It's every one of our houses. And you're shaping the world and changing communities by raising a generation, a next generation who will know the Lord and trust the Lord and follow the Lord. Brethren, we bless whatever city we are in when we simply, by what we can do, point this world to Jesus. As Paul would say, according to my earnest expectation and hope, that I shall not be put to shame in anything, by that with all boldness Christ shall even now as always be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. If we were to summarize this list, let me put it back so you can see that. If we were to summarize this simple list of ways it means as a child of God to bless wherever it is the Lord has placed us, I think the simple, clear definition, picture of these beautiful principles is what we've been thinking about today. God blessed Lee. He blessed him with talents, great talents. He was an amazing song leader. He was sharp, a sharp thinker, incredible leadership skills, wonderful at business. He was an impeccable shepherd of God's people, able to listen and bear with them so gently. And God blessed Lee with incredible resources. God blessed him to be successful in his endeavors. Far too many would have used those good blessings and squandered them on themselves. But Lee used the blessings of God to bless the road he traveled. Whether in New Albany, Indiana, or his time here in Tampa, he simply used what God gave him to point the world closer to Jesus. We seek the good, the blessing of where we are. But we don't lose sight of what all this is about. As Paul would say, we are confident, I say, when prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord. Or as the writer of Hebrews would say, here we do not have a lasting city, but we are seeking the city which is to come. What would we do without heaven? What help would we find? What comfort could there be if there weren't the promise of a day to come and that perfect home? Heaven takes us from our temporal reality and helps us remember that this is just but a moment in the grand scheme of eternity. And heaven reminds us there's far more at stake than simply what we realize in our day-to-day living. God has promised a day and a time of rest, a perfect place where we are comforted and cared in the presence of God Himself and the angels, which means every day till that day comes as an expectation that we use God's blessings for good. And heaven reminds us of that. One author said it this way: if you read history, you will find that the Christians who did the most for the present world were precisely those who thought most of the next. It is since Christians have largely ceased to think of the other world that they have become so ineffective in this. And maybe that's what makes weekends like this so precious. Maybe that's what Solomon had in mind when he said in Ecclesiastes 7 that it's better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting, because it's the end of man and the living will take it to heart. I thought a lot about this last night, that in the last year, the great cloud of witnesses that are gathered on heaven's shore, if we simply had the time and the resources and the screen large enough, we would fill the room with the precious examples of those who've gone on before us. And they, much like Abel, though gone, they still speak. Their example speaks. Their faith preaches boldly. We all know what it is that they each would say to us if they had the opportunity. Not for a moment would they wish to be back on earth, as much as we miss them. But they would compel us with every ounce of their fiber. Be steadfast to your Lord and faithful to your God. You keep walking with the Lord. Keep on living. Keep building families. Keep loving one another. Keep serving side by side. Because one day all too soon you'll be with us. One day all too soon you'll be here. And maybe that's what it is we need. To the best of our ability, steeped in our prayers, Lord, help me keep in the balance of my heart and the focus of my priority a love for this world, a love for the people I'm around, even if they don't love you or care for you, but to always have a longing for home. When we love the world but lose sight of heaven, we lose what all this is about. So easily we fall into the trap of what Paul warned against in Romans 12, and that is we become conformed to the world in which we're in, and we lose sight of the fact that this is not it. That my worth is not attached to however much I gain in my life here under the sun, and that real success is not found in jobs, material gain, and even for our children, it's not in their GPA, it's not in achieving an MVP. It's not in their sports, it's not in their pursuits. The highest and most noble pursuit God could ever give us is to know Him and walk closely with Him. And we lose that when we lose sight of heaven. But if all we do is focus on heaven, and we don't think about the world God has placed us in, we're sort of like that ostrich in the sand. We've dug our head, unaware and unconcerned about those living around us. Have you ever wondered, brethren, when we obeyed the gospel, why didn't Jesus take us home right then? Why didn't He say, you've done what I asked, you obeyed the good word, and so I'm going to bring you home today? I won't answer for God, but I wonder if the reason it is that God has left us even after we have done exactly what it is, He sent His Son for, if it's because there's more for us to do. We're left to be an influence, a salt on this earth, a light for those in the darkness. We're left to try and make this bitter world so much better by simply showing the beauty of Christ in the way that we live. Just like the psalmist in Psalm 84, he was blessing the road he traveled on the way to the highways of Zion. It says in Psalm 84, verse 5, how blessed is the man whose strength is in you, and whose heart are the highways to Zion. Passing through the valley of Baca, they make it a spring. The early rain also covers it with blessing. I love the language. On their way to the very presence of God, they pass through some valleys along the way, some desolate lands, but they don't leave it that way. No, I'm going to bless the road I travel. I'm going to make better the roads I find. I'm going to leave this world better than how I found it to the extent that I can as I continue my journey on home. Love your city, but long for home. And this is what it was about. That on the screen is a modern-day picture of Canaan land. It's taken from what most have estimated to be Mount Nebo, Mount Pisgah, where Moses reached his end. There Moses was on the east side of the Jordan, looking over what God had promised, and he had done his work. He brought God's people all the way to the border, and God showed him what was at hand. God showed him what was promised before he reached his end. What I love about pictures like this, brethren, is that whether or not you see it with me today, this is where we stand today. We're standing on the east side of the Jordan, and we're looking at a land that God has promised, and the land that God has promised is just as real as the dirt in Israel. It's just as true. There is a perfect place prepared for God's people. The plea of our God is, if you will walk with me today, if you will give your life to me today, when the time comes, you will cross that river and you will live with me in my home forever. Heaven is a prepared place for prepared people. And heaven is where our heart longs to go. I don't know how long it's been since you've been in a place like this. It could be you are here by the invitation of someone that you know, a family or a friend, and maybe this is also new. Or it could be that you've been away from something like this for some time, and this is your first time back in a while. And we're so thankful you're here. We're so glad that you're here. Heaven is not for perfect people. Heaven is for forgiven people. Heaven is for God's people who have put their trust in Him. And that promise of a perfect place is for you. And so if you've been far away from God and you've wandered far from God, right here tonight, God's calling you home. If you would just believe in Him, if you would just come back, the Lord is reaching out those nail-scarred hands, not to smite or to crush, but to receive you back and to hold you and to walk with you. And so if we can help you, if we can pray with you, if we can help you even to start the journey by faith, confessing Jesus as Lord, putting Him on in baptism, the path across the river to that beautiful home can be yours, and we'd love to help you. If we can help you in any way, let's do it right now as we stand and as we sing.